The grand audience hall was vast, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns whose light flickered gently against the walls adorned with tapestries that whispered stories of dynasties past. Wei Chen's footsteps echoed faintly on the polished stone floor as he was led through the heavy silk curtains that marked the entrance to the imperial presence. His breath caught in his throat, heart hammering beneath the modest scholar's robes that clung lightly to his slender frame. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense, curling upward in ghostly spirals, filling the chamber with a solemnity that seemed to press upon his very soul. At the center of the hall, upon a dais carved from jade and gold, sat Emperor Zhu Yujian. The monarch's imperial robes shimmered with intricate embroidery of dragons and phoenixes, the silk catching the lantern light like liquid fire. His posture was regal, commanding, yet Wei Chen's eyes, trained through years of observing the subtleties of human nature, caught the faint tremor of exhaustion beneath the surface. The emperor's gaze was inscrutable, dark pools that seemed to hold weighty secrets, and the burden of an empire teetering on the edge of collapse. Wei Chen bowed deeply, the tradition binding him in this moment as much as the weight of his new commission. The painter's mind raced, caught between awe for the man before him and the heavy knowledge of the task entrusted to his brush to capture a visage that was eternal yet stripped of its flawed humanity. Madame Lion, standing silently nearby with her silver-streaked hair framing a face carved by wisdom and hardship, leaned toward Wei Chen in a hushed tone. "Remember, young painter," she whispered, "the emperor wears a crown heavier than gold. Beneath the silk and jewels lies a man, fragile as the parchment you paint upon." Wei Chen's eyes flicked to the emperor again, noting the slight furrow between his brows, the tightness of his lips, and the restless glint that betrayed sleepless nights filled with anxiety and doubt. This was no immortal sovereign. This was a man caught in the relentless tide of history, desperate to secure a legacy even as his world crumbled. Minister Xiao stood rigidly to one side, his presence a stark contrast, a living embodiment of the court's iron will and unforgiving order. His sharp eyes never left Wei Chen, a silent reminder of the peril that accompanied any hint of defiance or hesitation. The audience was brief. Wordless commands and subtle gestures conveyed more than words ever could. As Wei Chen withdrew, he felt the weight of the emperor's gaze linger, a silent plea and a challenge intertwined. Alone in his chamber, the painter dipped his brush into ink, the familiar scratch of bristles against rice paper grounding him amidst the whirl of thoughts. He sketched feverishly, capturing the emperor's haunted eyes, the fragile curve of a brow, the tension in a jaw that spoke of unspoken fears. Each stroke was a testament not only to the man's outward majesty, but also to the vulnerability beneath a truth Wei Chen was forbidden to reveal. The palace around him hummed with whispered intrigues and hidden dangers, but in this quiet moment, Wei Chen confronted the most perilous secret of all: the humanity of the emperor, which he was commanded to erase. As night deepened, so too did Wei Chen's turmoil. The painter knew that the portraits he created would shape the future and memory, but at what cost? With every brushstroke, he was not merely immortalizing a ruler, he was erasing a person, obliterating the fragile humanity that made the emperor real. The palace corridors seemed to grow narrower with each step Wei Chen took, the once familiar walls transformed into looming barriers of stone and silence. The faint scent of incense mingled with the cold draft creeping under the heavy doors, carrying whispers of secrets and warnings that weighed on his shoulders like an iron yoke. As he approached the appointed chamber, a figure detached itself from the shadows. Minister Zhao, the emperor's unyielding enforcer. His dark robes rustled softly, embroidered insignia glinting faintly in the muted light, his eyes sharp as a hawk's and just as unrelenting. "Painter Wei," Xiao's voice cut through the stillness, low and edged with controlled menace. "The emperor's orders are not mere suggestions. They are the law that governs your brush, your canvas, and your very existence within these walls." Wei Chen bowed his head, the weight of the words settling deep in his chest. He felt the keen edge of Zhao's gaze, as if it sought to pierce the very soul beneath his scholarly robes. "I understand, Minister Zhao. I am committed to my duty. Understanding is not enough," Zhao replied, stepping closer until the distance between them was charged with silent threat. "There will be no room for hesitation or defiance. The portraits you create will shape history. They will immortalize the emperor's reign, not his flaws. Should you stray, the consequences will be dire." The painter's throat tightened. In the stillness, his mind raced not with fear alone, but with the heavy burden of the paradox he had been entrusted to embody. To immortalize and yet to erase. To honor and to obliterate. Zhao's shadow loomed not just over the corridors, but across the very essence of Wei Chen's art. Later, alone before his easel, the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the delicate silk stretched taut in the frame. Wei Chen's brush hovered uncertainly, the pigments seeming to blur beneath his fingers as doubt gnawed at his resolve. Each stroke carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, yet each truth threatened to unravel the fragile illusion the emperor demanded. Outside, the muffled footsteps of palace guards echoed sharply as Minister Zhao patrolled the grounds, his presence a constant reminder of the court's suffocating control. Wei Chen caught a glimpse of him through the latticed window, rigid, vigilant, a sentinel of repression enforcing the silence that swallowed dissent like a creeping fog. Despite the fear curling in his chest, a flicker of defiance kindled within the painter's heart. He dipped his brush anew, this time with a steadier hand, blending shadows and light in a dance as elusive as the emperor's own concealed fears. The image began to take shape not the flawless visage demanded, but one tinged with subtle hints, whispers of vulnerability woven beneath the imperial guise. Yet with every line drawn, the risk grew. The shadow of Minister Zhao stretched long and cold, a reminder that art here was not merely creation but survival. The heavy wooden door groaned softly as Madame Lion pushed it open, revealing the hidden chamber beyond. A faint scent of aged lacquer and dust hung in the air, mingling with the cold stillness that enveloped the room. Wei Chen stepped inside cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dim glow cast by a few scattered candles that flickered against the stone walls. Here, untouched by time's usual ravages in the bustling heart of the palace, stretched a series of murals, vast tapestries of painted history that whispered secrets from centuries past. The murals, though faded and cracked, shimmered with an eerie vitality. Figures of emperors long erased from official records stood frozen in moments of triumph and despair, their faces rendered with a breathtaking intimacy that seemed to defy the years. Wei Chen's gaze was drawn to one particular image, a regal man seated beneath a blossoming plum tree, his eyes heavy with sorrow and resolve. Time had worn the colors to muted earth tones, yet the sorrow in the emperor's eyes was palpable, transcending the centuries. Madame Lion's voice broke the silence, soft yet resolute. "These murals are the true chronicles of our dynasty, hidden away because they tell stories that the court deems inconvenient. They reveal the emperors as men flawed, mortal, vulnerable. The official histories erase these truths, painting only immortal ideals." Wei Chen's fingers hovered above the mural, hesitating before brushing against the cracked surface. The texture was rough beneath his touch, the paint brittle yet stubbornly clinging to the plaster. It was as though the wall itself breathed the memories of those long gone, their legacies suspended between preservation and oblivion. "Why hide them?" Wei Chen asked, his voice barely a whisper. Madame Lion's eyes met his, dark and piercing. "Because truth is dangerous, it threatens the illusion of eternal rule. The court fears that if the people see their emperors as mere men, the fragile order will crumble. These murals are forbidden, a secret kept to protect a fading dynasty." As Wei Chen moved through the chamber, the quiet weight of the hidden histories pressed upon him. Each mural was a testament to lives lived and lost, to dreams shattered beneath the weight of power and expectation. The knowledge unsettled him deeply. Here were the stories that his own work was meant to overwrite the faces he was commissioned to immortalize in perfection while erasing their flawed humanity. Madame Lion's presence beside him was steady, a reminder of the delicate balance between duty and truth that governed the palace. "Your task is not unlike those who painted these walls," she said. "To create, to preserve, but also to conceal. You must decide what legacy you will leave." The candle flames flickered, casting shifting shadows across the murals, as if the past itself was restless, yearning to be seen and remembered. Wei Chen felt the weight of this revelation settle heavily on his shoulders. The emperor's decree was no longer a mere artistic challenge. It was a command to participate in the erasure of history, to silence the very humanity that these walls had so courageously preserved. In that dim chamber, surrounded by the silent testimonies of forgotten emperors, Wei Chen's resolve wavered. The boundaries between art and memory blurred, and the painter found himself standing at a crossroads where every brushstroke would carry the burden of truth or deception. As he turned to Madame Lion, the question burned quietly between them: could art be both a weapon of erasure and a beacon of remembrance? And at what cost would such a duality come? The chamber's heavy door remained open behind them, a threshold between the forbidden past and the uncertain future. Wei Chen knew that once he stepped back into the bright halls of the palace, nothing would remain the same. The hidden murals had shattered his illusions, and with them, the fragile balance of his loyalty and conscience. Yet the path forward was still shrouded in shadow, as elusive and delicate as the faded pigments beneath his fingertips. He lingered a moment longer, eyes tracing the silent faces on the walls, ghosts of emperors who had vanished from memory but lived on in their painted remnants. The painter's heart tightened with a melancholy that mingled reverence and despair. He would carry their stories within him, a secret weight that no decree could erase. And as the candlelight flickered once more, casting long shadows that danced like vanished souls, Wei Chen understood that his own art would become part of this fragile legacy, a haunting dance between memory and oblivion. The painter's chamber was cloaked in the muted hues of dusk, shadows pooling around the edges of the room as Wei Chen sat by his worktable, a scroll unfurled before him. The faint scent of ink mingled with the lingering fragrance of sandalwood incense, a reminder of the palace's delicate balance between tradition and unrest. Across from him, Jin Ho's slender fingers, streaked with black ink, moved with a reckless confidence, painting symbols and figures that defied the rigid lines demanded by imperial decree. "Master Wei," Jin Hoa said quietly, his voice carrying the tremor of both excitement and defiance, "why must we confine ourselves to the emperor's image alone? What of the people, their stories, their struggles?" Wei Chen's eyes lingered on the young apprentice's work, a swirling composition, where dragons morphed into clouds and faces emerged from the mist, half hidden, half revealed. The brush strokes were bold, almost rebellious. "The emperor's portrait is our duty," Wei Chen replied carefully, his voice low, "but I see what you mean. There is a world beyond these walls, filled with truths our paintings dare not speak." Jin Hao's gaze met Wei Chen's, bright with fervor. "Art should be freedom, not chains. If we only paint what we retold, then what is the worth of our craft?" A silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the palace guard's footsteps, the faint murmur of voices behind closed doors. Wei Chen felt the weight of his own suppressed doubts, pressing against the walls of his conscience. Days passed, and Jin Hao's restless spirit only grew more apparent. He lingered longer over his sketches, infusing them with subtle symbols of resistance, a broken seal here, a shadowed figure there. Wei Chen found himself drawn to these hidden messages, yet also fearful of the consequences. Minister Zio's watchful eyes were everywhere. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shafts of light through the lattice windows, Minister Zio entered the chamber without announcement. His presence was a cold gust, silencing the room instantly. "Jin Hoa," Zio's voice was sharp, "your recent work borders on insubordination." The emperor's image must remain unblemished. Jin Ho straightened, meeting the minister's gaze squarely. My brush seeks only to reveal what lies beneath the surface, not to defy the throne. Minister Zio's lips tightened into a thin line. Beware the path you tread. The palace does not tolerate rebellion, even in art. As Zhou departed, the room seemed to exhale a held breath. Wei Chen's heart pounded not just from fear, but from a growing recognition that Jin Ho's courage stirred something long dormant within him. That night, under the flickering light of a lantern, Wei Chen stared at his own ink-stained hands. Each smudge was a reminder of his skill and his chains. Memories of his childhood in the provincial town washed over him, days spent watching his father paint. Tales of honor and legacy whispered in the family's modest home. How had his own brush become a tool of erasure rather than creation? The next morning, in the palace garden, where plum blossoms drifted like pale snow, Jin Ho approached Wei Chen. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and renewal. "Master," Jin Ho said softly, "there is still time to paint the truth, even if only in whispers. Together, we can weave memory into illusion, hope into silence." Wei Chen looked up at the fragile blossoms, their petals trembling in the breeze. A faint smile touched his lips, the first in many months. "Perhaps," he murmured, "there is a way to honor the past without surrendering to oblivion." As the two stood beneath the blooming trees, the palace around them seemed to hold its breath, caught between the weight of history and the flickering light of rebellion. The ink on their brushes was no longer just pigment, it was the beginning of a new story, fragile yet unyielding. Yet beyond the garden walls, shadows lengthened, and the cost of such defiance remained unknown. The palace corridors, usually alive with the soft murmurs of servants and the rustle of silk robes, seemed unnervingly silent that night. Wei Chen had just finished his latest sketch, a preliminary study for a portrait that sought to balance light and shadow, truth and illusion. His brush hovered uncertainly above the paper when Lan Ying appeared at the threshold of his chamber, her presence barely a whisper in the stillness. "Master Wei," she said softly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I have something you must see, but we must be cautious." Wei Chen's heart quickened. The young servant's rare visit was never without cause. He motioned her inside, closing the door gently behind them. Lan Ying produced a folded letter from the folds of her robe, its paper worn and edges frayed. "It was intercepted," she whispered, "meant for Minister Zio's eyes only." With trembling fingers, Wei Chen unfolded the letter. The ink was faded but legible, the words heavy with conspiracy. It spoke of discontent within the court, a faction plotting to dethrone Emperor Zhu Yujian and seize power amid the chaos that gripped the empire. Names were hinted at but obscured, the veil of secrecy thick and suffocating. Wei Chen's mind reeled. The emperor, whose likeness he was destined to immortalize in brush strokes of oblivion, was not only a ruler fighting external enemies, but also endangered by those closest to him. The letter's existence meant that the palace walls concealed more than just whispers, they harbored deadly secrets. "What will you do?" Lan Ying's voice trembled, betraying her fear. Wei Chen stared at the letter, the weight of its contents pressing down upon his conscience. To reveal it could mean his own destruction. To stay silent was to become complicit. His art, once a sanctuary of expression, now felt like a cage forged by invisible chains. Days passed in a haze of anxiety. Minister Zio's presence loomed like a storm cloud, his gaze ever watchful. Wei Chen sensed the enforcer's suspicion growing, the subtle tightening of control over palace affairs. The painter's brush grew heavier, each stroke a battle between duty and doubt. One evening, as Wei Chen labored in his studio under the dim glow of lanterns, footsteps approached. The door opened with deliberate slowness, and Minister Zhou entered, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Painter," he said, voice low and cold, "your loyalty to the emperor is paramount. Remember that the portraits you create are not merely art, they are the legacy of the dynasty." Wei Chen nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "I understand, Minister Zhao." But beneath the surface, a silent rebellion stirred a determination to infuse his work with the subtle truths hidden beneath layers of paint. That night, Wei Chen returned to the intercepted letter, reading it once more by candlelight. The fragile paper seemed to pulse with the urgency of its revelation. He knew the palace's fate, and his own hung precariously in the balance. The painter's journey had taken a perilous turn, entwining his brush with the shadows of conspiracy. As the empire teetered on the edge of collapse, Wei Chen grappled with a single, haunting question: could art preserve truth in a world bent on erasing it? The palace studio was shrouded in a muted glow, filtered through the delicate lattice windows that cast slender patterns over the silk canvas stretched tight before Wei Chen. The air was heavy with the scent of ink and drying pigments, a familiar comfort that now mingled uneasily with the weight of the task at hand. Emperor Zhu Yujian sat quietly, regal in his crimson robes embroidered with golden dragons, a figure carved from imperial tradition and unyielding authority. Yet beneath the surface of his composed demeanor, Wei Chen discerned a flicker of something fragile, an invisible tremor that betrayed the burdens hidden behind the emperor's inscrutable gaze. Wei Chen's brush hovered above the canvas, poised between duty and conscience. Each stroke was a measured act of creation and concealment. The emperor's portrait was not merely a likeness. It was a crafted illusion, designed to immortalize a sovereign while erasing the flawed man beneath the crown. Yet, as the images formed beneath Wei Chen's skilled hand, subtle truths began to seep through the layers of paint. The delicate shadows beneath the emperor's eyes deepened, suggesting sleepless nights haunted by rebellion and fear. A faint furrow crept across the brow, betraying the weight of impermanence that the emperor so desperately sought to hide. Minister Zhao stood silently near the doorway, his gaze sharp and unyielding. The political enforcer embodied the iron will of the court, a sentinel against any deviation from the imperial decree. His presence was a constant reminder of the peril inherent in Wei Chen's work, a silent threat shadowing every brushstroke. Yet the painter's heart beat with a quiet defiance, the need to capture the emperor's true face, however fleeting, growing stronger with each passing moment. "Your Majesty," Wei Chen murmured softly, breaking the heavy silence, "may I observe you more closely, to capture the spirit beyond the robe and crown?" The emperor inclined his head with a measured grace, his eyes reflecting a depth of sorrow that no courtier dared voice. "Very well, Wei Chen. But remember, the image you create must serve the dynasty, not your own conscience." Wei Chen's gaze lingered on the emperor's hands resting lightly on his lap, the veins prominent beneath the pale skin, the slight tremor betraying the fragility of a man clinging to a vanishing legacy. He dipped his brush in ink, then gently traced a line of shadow beneath the eye, a subtle curve of worry in the mouth's corners. Each mark was a silent testament to vulnerability, an unspoken rebellion against the erasure demanded by the throne. The painter's mind swirled with conflicting emotions, loyalty and doubt, reverence and fear. To reveal the emperor's humanity was to risk everything. Yet to paint only the immortal ideal was to betray truth itself. The studio seemed to close in around Wei Chen, the walls bearing witness to the dangerous dance of memory and oblivion unfolding on the canvas. A sudden breeze stirred the papers on the worktable, scattering sketches and letters like whispers from the past. Wei Chen caught a glimpse of a folded note, its ink blurred and cryptic, a reminder of the palace's simmering unrest and the fragile threads holding the empire together. The weight of his task pressed heavier than ever. Minister Zhu's sharp voice broke through the painter's reverie. "Enough hesitation, Wei Chen. The emperor's image must be flawless, no hint of weakness." His eyes flicked to the canvas with suspicion. "Do not forget the consequences of disobedience." Wei Chen met the enforcer's gaze steadily, a quiet resolve hardening within him. Flawless, yes, but true. The words hung in the air like a fragile promise, a line drawn between survival and sacrifice. As dusk settled over the palace, the portrait took shape, a haunting blend of grandeur and fragility, illusion and truth. Wei Chen's brush had captured the vanishing emperor's true face, a visage that would forever walk the shadowed halls of memory and oblivion. Yet beneath the surface of this masterpiece lay the seeds of conflict, the fragile nature of power and legacy intertwined with the painter's own fate. Wei Chen knew that with each subtle truth he painted, the walls of the palace grew ever more perilous, the silence around him thickening with unspoken threats.